Hello everyone, my name is Volodymyr and today we are going to talk about cyber and electronic warfare. In this paper, I will first present the reason why I chose this topic. And after that, I'll explain some of the general concepts about cyber warfare, electronic warfare, or electronic countermeasure. I presume that most in my audience are no IT experts or anything like that. That is why I have chosen to present it in an accessible manner, understandable for everyone. It's not my goal to make any of you experts on this subject, and therefore I will only scratch the surface of this topic. A substantial portion of this paper will be about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I will start by stating the reason why I chose this topic and a bit of background of this war. Cyber warfare. What is it? Cyber warfare is usually defined as a cyber attack or series of attacks that target a country. It has the potential to wreak havoc on government and civilian infrastructure and disrupt critical systems, resulting in damage to the state and even loss of life. US Department of Defense defines cyber warfare very broadly. Threat to national security posed by malicious use of the internet. Types of cyber warfare attacks may include espionage, sabotage, DOS attacks, electrical power grid attacks, propaganda attacks, economic disruption, and surprise attacks. In a later chapter, we will look at some real life examples of these types of cyber warfare attacks against Ukraine. And I will also explain the reason why I chose to talk about the war in Ukraine and why it is relevant for me personally. Here's, for example, uh, an example of a DOS attack. DOS attack, it forces a machine or network to shut down, which then makes them inaccessible to its users. It essentially deprives the users of the resources or service they want to access. This is done by flooding the target with traffic or sending it specific information that induces a crash. Um, a real life example, in May 2021, Belgium suffered a DOS attack that affected Belnet. That is an internet network that connects universities, research centers, and public institutions. About 200 organizations were affected. It is suspected that China was behind the attack, but there is still no hard evidence to back up this claim. But there is a correlation. The Belgian Committee on External Relations was about to conduct an unprecedented hearing on the atrocities committed by China against ethnic minorities called Uyghurs in China, with witnesses who were supposed to testify. But the hearing had to be cancelled because of the attacks. What are the targets of cyber warfare attacks? Here are some of the most common targets that can become victim of cyber attacks. These kinds of institutions or programs should especially invest in their cybersecurity to minimize the threat, especially because they have access to important data of others, for example, client information, which can be stolen or used for ransom. Some of these may well be considered as national security threat if a vital and sensitive information is stolen. Now, these are generally the targets of attacks. Communication apps used for phone calls, emails, text messages, and so on. Financial institutions are a primary target for attackers, and any organization processing or dealing with bank or credit card information are at risk. Government institutions frequently targeted by cyber criminals who are after private citizen information or confidential public data. Transportation infrastructure. like small cars and road infrastructure, traffic control systems. Healthcare institutions, anything from medical records at a local clinic to critical care systems at a national hospital. Next, educational institutions. Its research data is often confidential, and personal records about students or staff can be valuable for cyber criminals. When used in war, the attacker needs to prepare a campaign plan, which includes a realistic and specific assessment of the costs of intelligence collection and benefits. This means finding out the possible effects on the combatants of both sides and external parties. Any cyber operation has to be tailored and determined by the intended effect and the nature of the target. Possible intended effects on the battlefield can include disrupting of command mechanisms and weapon software. This will require reconnaissance of the target and, in the end, writing a code to use it in the attack. All this has to be done sometime before the intended attack date, together with testing and refreshing attack tools. While all of this may seem serious, some think that cyber attacks are overrated. While invaluable for espionage and crime, they are far from decisive in armed conflict, according to some people. Examples of cyber warfare operations or attacks. The Stuxnet virus. It was a worm virus which attacked the nuclear program of the Iranian regime, one of the most sophisticated cyber attacks in history. This malware spread via infected USB devices and targeted data acquisitions and supervisory control systems. The attack seriously damaged Iran's ability to manufacture nuclear weapons. Then we have a Sony Pictures hack, which was very famous, happened in 2014. It was committed by a group who called themselves Guardians of Peace. FBI believes that the attackers are from North Korea. Attackers first threatened to commit acts of terrorism against movie theaters, demanding that Sony cancel the planned release of The Interview, uh, which is a comedy movie about two Americans who assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong un. Attackers had taken terabytes of private data, deleted the original copies from Sony computers, and left messages threatening to release the information if Sony didn't comply with the attackers' demands. Next is enemies of Qatar. Elliot Broidy, an American Republican fundraiser, sued the government of Qatar in 2018, accusing it of stealing and leaking his emails in an attempt to discredit him. The Qataris allegedly saw him as an obstacle to improving their standing in Washington. According to the lawsuit, the brother of the Qatari emir was alleged to have orchestrated a cyber warfare campaign, along with others in Qatari leadership. 1,200 people were targeted by the same attackers, with many of these being known as enemies of Qatar, including senior officials from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Russian cyber attacks. Russia also has shown its cyber warfare capabilities in previous years. For example, in the war against Ukraine back in 2015, Russian hackers exploited critical system vulnerabilities in the Ukrainian power grid, which caused a blackout that affected more than 220,000 Ukrainian residents for 1 to 6 hours. It also employed malware to hinder the repair effort. It was, it was the first successful attack on a power grid against another country. Um, uh, the next Russian cyber attack, called Bronze Soldier. In 2007, Estonia relocated a statue associated with the Soviet Union, the bronze soldier, from the center of its capital, Tallinn, to a military cemetery near the city. Estonia suffered a number of significant cyber attacks after that in the following moments. Um, Estonian government websites, media outlets, and banks were overloaded with traffic in massive denial of service attacks and consequently were taken offline. US election fraud. Russian hackers and trolls helped elect Donald Trump as president in 2016 presidential election. How? Trolls did not elect Trump, voters did, but the Russians released hacked materials and framed the news agenda and presidential debates, changed political opinion of candidate Hillary Clinton with social media, news and ads. They created protests and counter-protests reflecting on the incumbent president and his chosen successor. Changed the course of careers, for example, that of Trump's lawyer James Comey, who went to jail for for a few months, if I remember right. So when we assume it was a close call election, then these practices were sufficient to sway enough voters to decide the election. That is how it worked. Now I'll talk about a case study, namely the Ukrainian war, uh, or the war in Ukraine. The first social media war in history, actually. Um, why I chose this topic? The most honest and straightforward answer is that I have become emotionally invested in the matter of warfare, um, including cyber warfare and electronic warfare, because of this war. Let me explain why. I am of Ukrainian origin and have lived in the west of Ukraine until the age of 10. Since the Russian Ukrainian war started, or I should say, Russian invasion of Ukraine, that is a better term. Since the war started, I have followed it daily and very closely, maybe even obsessively. So I want to state here in advance that yes, I am probably biased as to why this war started and who the good and the bad guys are. Nevertheless, I do believe that I can get the facts separated from the emotions, from my emotions. And the fact is this, that invading a country and attacking peaceful citizens and Ukraine's critical infrastructure, seizing nuclear power plants like that one of Zaporizhia, just for the sake of terrorizing the whole world with the prospect of a nuclear disaster or without a doubt war crimes. Another unusual thing about this war is that the whole world can follow it in the news and on social media, with the latter being used as a weapon by both sides for their propaganda purposes. Here is a quick summary of some of the relevant points about the Russian-Ukrainian war, explaining the possible reasons why Russia invaded Ukraine on 24th of February 2022. Most of you may know that the Russian Federation started an unprovoked and illegal war of conquest against Ukraine under false pretext and because of President Putin's fantasies. I mean war criminal Vladimir Putin's fantasies. There are many fantasies in his head actually, and people wonder if he might have really become crazy. I will name only three of the most important illusions that Putin says he believes. Number one, if Ukraine gets into NATO, then that is a threat to the national security of Russia. Also, Ukraine is being pushed into NATO by the US and the West, as if Ukraine has no desires of its own. Second, Russia used to be big, now it's small. I don't like that, so I will steal some land from our brotherly nation of Ukraine, who doesn't understand how good it is being with Russia. Number three, people in Ukraine, especially in the Donbass area, need to be liberated. Again, in quotes, because according to me, that doesn't look much like a liberation when you bomb peaceful citizens and so on. Because so people in Ukraine, according to Putin, especially in the Donbass area, need to be liberated because Ukrainian Nazi government with its Jewish president sounds strange, but Putin believes it, is committing genocide against their own population in the Donbass region. Now, many in the world were surprised by a famous line our president said to President Joe Biden. Our President Zelensky, said to President Joe Biden. Joe Biden proposed to evacuate our president and his team with an US airplane when bombs were dropping on the capital city, Kiev. Our president replied, "I need ammo, not a ride." This quote went viral together with his videos that he posted outside of the government building in downtown Kiev. Ukraine's President Zelensky, together with his team, went outside of the government building, put on his social media live stream on, and said, in contrary to the Russian propaganda statements that say that I have fled the country, I want to say and show you, the Ukrainians and the whole world, that I am here. My team is here. We are all here. And we are going to stay no matter what. Whole world could see where the video was taken. Downtown Kiev, Bankova Street, governmental district. It was no fake and was a big step at Russian propaganda. It was also a very smart move by Zelensky, using his most prized weapon as a former actor and comedian who worked in entertainment. He used the internet, social media, his words of defiance to show all of Ukraine, we will get through this. I am here, I'm going nowhere, and we will get through this. That moment was the turning point in the war and showed the world that Ukraine has decided to fight and needed military and other support from other nations. Since then, Ukraine has received billions of dollars worth of weapons. This help was not only to help Ukraine, but to send a clear message to all other totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. The message being, you cannot conquer a sovereign country by force and steal its land in the 21st century, especially when that country has not attacked you or anybody else. Democratic countries all around the world, like USA and Europe and Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea, they want to maintain the status quo that has existed since the Second World War. And Russia is trying to destroy or change that status quo by challenging the global hegemon, like they like to call America, and say that America is that because of America, the world, the political world, geopolitical world is unilateral, which means that America is boss of the world and decides what happens. And Russia doesn't like that, not at all. And for Putin, it is a real trauma that the Soviet Union fell apart and that Russia lost the Cold War. And for him, that's a tragedy. He has said that in a quote that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. And he means that. And Everything that he has done since he is in office is a reflection of that. He is building towards making, restoring the Russian Empire. Now, uh, Starlink. I want to talk about Starlink, why Ukraine needs it, and how it works. So, because of this support from all over the world, Ukraine started to receive many types of warfare technologies. After only 2 days, Ukrainian President Zelensky reached out to Elon Musk to ask to help Ukraine with reliable internet service. Elon Musk responded with a donation of more than 20,000 mobile Starlink satellite dishes of his company SpaceX. This provided much needed reliable internet service and thus communications lifeline to counter Russian attacks on vital military telecommunications facilities, and also to make sure that our population had access to the internet. This is very important. For example, to warn people about important messages via internet in case that TV or cell towers would be destroyed. Also to counter Russian propaganda, which is very effective in Russia, but not so much in Ukraine or the West. By now, Russia has fired more than 3,500 ballistic missiles on Ukraine, destroying much of critical civilian and military infrastructure. But still a small portion. Ukraine is a big country, is the biggest country in Europe after Russia. So they will need a lot of more missiles to destroy Ukraine, I think. So, and in the hottest months of the war, in May and June, Russia fired also more than 50,000 artillery shells per day, which is a staggering number, I think. Starlink became a big part of the eyes and ears of Ukrainian military. Many thanks to Elon Musk for that. Attacks. Now, Fancy Bear is one of the attacks that uh, Russian hackers uh, committed. CrowdStrike claims that Russian organized cybercrime group Fancy Bear targeted Ukrainian rocket forces and artillery between 2014 and 2016. The malware was spread via an infected Android application used by the D-30 howitzer artillery unit to manage targeting data. Ukrainian officers made wide use of the app, which contained the X-Agent spyware. This is considered to be a highly successful attack, resulting in the destruction of over 80% of Ukraine's D-30 model howitzers. Sandworm. In April 2022, Ukrainian government has revealed that it had prevented an attack from a group called Sandworm. They targeted one of the largest companies, energy companies. Hackers targeted, um, tried to shut down substations, which would have caused blackouts for over 2 million people. This group of hackers had been able to compromise an unnamed private company responsible for supplying power to 2 million residents. The strike was planned on Friday, 8th of April, just before the weekend, to cause as much damage as possible and to as much inconvenience as possible. Ukraine and her partners were very lucky to have responded on time. Companies ESET and Microsoft have helped to identify and neutralize the malicious software used in the attack. In a statement, ESET said it had worked closely with the Ukraine Cyber Authority in order to remediate and protect this critical infrastructure network. According to researchers, the group tried to deploy the Industroyer 2 malware against high voltage electrical substations in Ukraine, as well as deploying several destructive malware types, including Caddy Wiper. This malware that has the objective to wipe, means erase and destroy, the hard disk of the victim machine. Viper software has also been used on the first day of the Russian invasion to attack the US satellite communication provider Viasat. Sandworm is believed to be a cyber military unit from Russia that is part of the foreign military agency GRU. Spillover effects. The attack the attack on Viasat was, according to many Western intelligence services, the most significant up until March 2022. It has affected military as well as government communications. It had also a spillover effect to other countries in Europe, which probably was unintended. Unintended. After the attack, Viasat had to replace some of their customers' modems, but its core infrastructure and satellites were not damaged. The main objective was presumably to sow confusion by disrupting Ukrainian command and control. Ukrainian IT army and the anonymous collective. Overall, though, Ukraine has proved more resilient than most have expected. This is thanks to the help of Ukrainian IT army, which has more than 200,000 volunteer members on the Telegram and Twitter social media apps. They vow to help Ukraine win this war on the IT front. At the beginning of the invasion, Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhail Fedorov, gave a speech where he pointed out that Ukraine has a lot of talented Ukrainians in the digital sphere who could help. Developers, cyber specialists, designers, copywriters, marketers, targetologists, etc. He then asked volunteers from the underground hackers community and cybersecurity experts to help protect critical infrastructure and conduct digital espionage missions against Russian troops in cyberspace. Volunteers had to submit their resume stating their specialties such as malware development. Then they were divided in offensive and defensive cyber units. An important and encouraging effect of this war has been that it has united all the citizens of Ukraine to an incredible degree. Everyone is willing to help with what they can. Yes, women and children left hot areas to escape Russian missile attacks, but the men rushed to the enlistment offices even if they had never fought in a war or served in the military. Ukraine has also formed an enormous territorial defense army, uh, which is almost 300,000 members. Formed and they formed army formations, real army formations like brigade, regiment, battalion, and so on. Um, this is what helped destroying the Russian ground army during their advance on the capital Kiev in the first days of the war. Again, this was possible only because many thousands of Ukrainians had cell phone and internet service, access to media, to watch live stream news 24/7, which is a very big component of the war in Ukraine, and that our armed forces had walkie-talkies and other communications equipment. Otherwise, it is very hard to conduct military operations against a force that is much stronger than you. Communication is key in wars. Offensive units were given tasks to help the UAF, Ukraine Armed Forces, conduct digital espionage operations. There is also support from hacker groups like Anonymous, which have declared cyber war on President Putin